Hey, this is Chadillac from the Cage Rage podcast. This is a Sunday morning look at the Khabib Conor McGregor fight. Just watched the McGregor interview, watched the interview with Dana White, saw a few things with people speculating conspiracies, all kinds of crazy stuff. So just want to throw my 2 cents in. Real quickly, we're doing a podcast on Tuesday. We'll try and have that out Tuesday afternoon to Tuesday evening, hopefully, if that goes well. But I wanted to throw something out real quickly so we've got our hats in the ring at least in advance. So here goes. Number one, we do know that a fight has been set. We can't say much more than that about it, but yes, there has been another fight set already. I can't tell you any more than that yet. When we find out more, I'll be able to tell you more about that on Tuesday, I hope. So when we can say more, we will. But I can tell you that there's been another fight set. Beyond that, here's something that's kind of crazy about the whole thing. You're starting to see on social media the idea that somehow Conor had something to do with this. There's the conspiratorial idea that this was all a setup from Jump Street. And I wanted to just cover a few of those things real fast. Okay, so number one, if that's a conspiracy and this was all a setup, that's the most beautiful setup I've ever seen. Hollywood couldn't have done a better job. That was as real as anything I've ever seen. I was titillated from start to finish. The fight itself was pretty damn good. But the after fight and the chaos that ensued was utterly breathtaking. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. My wife and I sat there and watched it in astonishment. And the whole world did too. Having said that, is that good for the UFC? Hell yes, that's good for the UFC. That's crazy. All these people saying, oh, it's bad for the sport, it's this and that. And, you know, if there's one thing I learned a long time ago as a promoter, and I promoted Cage Rage for 20 years, and the best thing that ever happened to us, and I'll tell you who taught me this. Mark Coleman came to one of my early shows. This was probably 1999. We were doing a show at a little place called Kokomo, Indiana. And Mark Coleman and Kevin Randleman came in. Coleman had just won the belt. He may have had it for a year by then. I'd have to check my date facts. But Kevin and Mark came in. Nobody even knew who Kevin really was at that point. I did, but most people didn't because I knew him from wrestling and things like that. So they came in because they were friends of the show. They brought a guy in. I'm not going to say his name because some really terrible things happened to him afterwards. So I'm going to leave that unsaid. And, you know, maybe if Mark wants to talk about that when he comes on as a guest, he can. But regardless, this kid lost the fight, and he lost the fight due to disqualification. He dominated the entire fight, smashed this other kid. And keep in mind, this is 1999. So we had a square cage. It was basically the equivalent of a giant dog kennel, which back then, you know, most people had wrestling rings at best. So us having a really big cage was a big deal back then. So we also had rules. So we had, by that time, we had integrated 2 rounds, one 15-minute round and one overtime round of 11 minutes. I don't even remember why we said 11 minutes instead of 10, but that's what we came up with. So 11-minute round. Donnie Michael, who's the actual inventor of Cage Rage when it comes down to it, not me. I just took it and ran with it from the point of he didn't want to do it past, you know, just a couple of shows. And he said, you can have it. It's yours. Take it and run with it. And I built it into a monster. But Donnie Michael actually invented Cage Rage, on the record, for what that's worth. So, where was I? Oh, so yeah, this guy that was with Mark, that Mark brought to fight in the show, completely destroyed this kid who was a karate guy. And Coleman's guy, of course, was this meathead wrestler. And he got disqualified because after the fight was over, the referee who was also a karate instructor, and the owner partner of Cage Rage at that time, Donnie Michael, always will be a karate instructor, is a legitimate karate individual, well respected in the industry, multi-time world champion, and a fantastic individual for whatever that's worth. But he had a guy, I don't remember his name now, it doesn't matter, who came in and did the refereeing because nobody knew how to referee back then either. And he did the refereeing. I couldn't because I was still fighting back then. The guy's name, for what it's worth, was Nate. I won't say his last name, but Nate had destroyed this guy, but he wouldn't let up on the choke, which was just this massive headlock where he was crushing this guy's head. He wouldn't let up on the headlock, and so finally the referee disqualified Nate, and Mark went completely crazy. He was wasted drunk. Kevin wasn't drunk, but just kind of followed along with Mark and did whatever Mark did back then because they were just wild guys, and I say that with the most love I can say for two human beings. And Mark will laugh about this when he hears it too, so I'm not saying anything terrible. Believe me, anybody who knows Coleman will laugh at this and go, oh yeah, I can tell you a couple Coleman stories. So this isn't some big secret. Anyway, so Coleman is on one side of the cage. Randleman is on the other side of the cage, on opposite sides of this square cage. Like I said, it's a dog kennel, basically, with 12-foot tall walls on a square cage. And the cage starts going and breathing back and forth. It almost falls apart. We were scared to death. When it's all said and done and everybody calms down, of course, we had police there because back then you never knew if the show was going to get shut down. You didn't know if the fire chief was going to come in and say, we're done. This isn't happening. The mayor, the governor, you never knew. Things were way, way different back then. And we're going to get to that in these later Cage Rage podcasts as we start to get into the real historicity of MMA and start to show people what it was really all about. And I've got a lot of video where I can take you down those roads and show you a lot about it. I'm also writing a screenplay and a book about that. There's a lot going on. But anyways, so when it was all said and done, I went up to Mark and I said, Mark, you can't do this. You're ruining my show. What are you doing? Mark, what are you doing? You're a professional. You're the champion of the world. Are you crazy? How can you do this to me? And he said, brother, and he slapped that great big hand on my shoulder. He said, don't worry about it. It'll make it even better. I said, Mark, how could that possibly make this any better? You just climbed on the cage. You almost broke it. We've got cops everywhere. We never know from show to show if we're going to get shut down, if they're going to come in and put a town ordinance, a city ordinance, a statewide ordinance on it. We don't know. We're one of the only states. This is way back, keep in mind, okay? This is 20 years ago now. We were one of the only states, Indiana, that it was actually legal in. And that was a gray area. It wasn't legal in Michigan. It wasn't legal in Kentucky. It wasn't legal in Ohio. And it was not legal in Illinois. So we were surrounded by illegal states. So everyone came to Indiana to have these things. And so Cage Rage grew very, very quickly. And we became the center for all of this. And we were recognized very, very quickly as being one of the best shows in the Midwest because of that. So it was the right place at the right time. The Beatles would have been just another band, if not for timing. They'd have still been good. But would they have been the Beatles? Who knows? Anyways, you get the idea. My point is that Mark said, it's going to make it better, trust me. And lo and behold, people showed up in droves. And instead of selling, 1,000 tickets, we sold 3,000 the next time. And then it was 3,500. And every time something crazy happened, we sold more tickets. And every time something went completely bananas in the cage, outside of the cage, in the crowd, in the parking lot, no matter what happened, as long as it was crazy, we sold more tickets. So this is good for the sport. This is good for sales. This is good for everything, because no matter what, as long as people are clicking on this and they're talking about it, it's good. You know, the good press, bad press, we'll take any press we can get thing. It stays true for everything, not just rock and roll bands. It stands true for every single aspect of entertainment. And make no mistake about it, MMA is the supreme sports entertainment. Having said that, I don't think it was a conspiracy. I don't think it was a setup. I don't think in any way that it was a planned operation. Had it been planned, they'd had a lot more police there to handle the task. And then one other thing I wanted to cover just real quickly, because I saw a friend of mine from jiu-jitsu, a black belt that I'm not going to mention his name either, because I don't want him to break my arms for, you know, going against what he says he saw. Kidding. Ricardo, how you doing, brother? I want you still to come on the show soon. Anyways, he posted on his Facebook page the idea that Conor had actually jumped over the fence and started the fight, and that he was the one who was the secondary person who brought this. And I didn't see it that way at all. Conor was kind of laying back, and then he started to walk over there after everything kind of really started to erupt in the crowd. You kind of see him walk over there, and then boom, the camera goes away from everything. And if you were watching it on pay-per-view like we were, you couldn't see anything. But as you start to look at the different footage online that people have put up from their phones and just different camera angles and things, you can see pretty clearly that Conor starts to walk over, and then at one point he jumps up on the fence and he's kind of straddling the fence. And what Ricardo was talking about is that it looks like somebody kind of throws a towel or something, and Conor kind of takes a swat down at him. But I wouldn't call that a punch. I'd kind of call that more self-defense. And then he kind of gets back down. Conor is completely turned around, and we'll call him red shirt guy. So the guy in the red shirt that comes from Khabib's corner, apparently, jumps over the fence into the ring. Conor's completely got his back turned. Keep in mind, he just tapped out to a brutal neck crank. And, you know, I've heard people talking a lot of smack about Conor tapping out to that crank, and I've tapped out to that crank in practice. That is brutal, and that will, not only will it break your jaw, it'll break your neck. And can you imagine the eagle putting that on you after 4 rounds? You know, there's no honor lost in that. I don't know. I gave Conor, I gave him the 3rd round. I gave Khabib 1. Obviously, I gave him 2. I gave Conor 3. And the 4th round, it looked pretty even until Khabib took over. And then, you know, the fight was over. But for whatever it's worth, I would have tapped to that too in a second. I think Conor looks more like a high-level purple belt on the ground, and I had expected that he would work much, much harder on his ground game. It's clear that he had worked pretty well on staying off the ground, but you don't learn how to wrestle in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 4 years. You learn how to wrestle over a lifetime. That's just how that is. But back to the point. Red shirt jumps over the fence and punches Conor in what looks like the back of the head. I don't know how he even stayed standing through that, let alone was able to kind of walk around afterwards and have some kind of mental clarity. DC was there on the spot. It just goes to show what a great guy he is, what a true champion he is, what a class act he is. If that had been John Jones, you know, he'd have been in there eating cheese anyway. So, DC, you're the man. Conor, great show. You didn't get it this time, but you're going to get another chance. And if you check out our last Cage Rage podcast, or Cage Rage podcast 5, I think. I don't know. I'll have Aaron post it. again for everyone. And I kind of went through and posted it last night too after the fight so people could see. If you look at about 9 minutes and 30 seconds into that, fight analyst Miguel Iterati calls it almost to a T of what goes wrong for Conor, how it goes wrong, and how it ends. And he literally calls it almost to a T. To a T. So check that out for yourself at the Cage Rage Podcast on YouTube, thecageragepodcast.com, the Cage Rage Podcast on Facebook. Thanks for joining in. This is just a Sunday check-in, so it's pretty unofficial. I'm going to send this to Aaron, and hopefully he can get it edited and put up before tomorrow night. There probably won't be anything fancy on it. If there is, consider yourself lucky. If not, just consider yourself lucky that you got to see my pretty face. What do you think? It's not so bad, right? A little gray? All right, it's not so great. But yeah, anyways, namaste.